Today's episode of Ham Radio 2.0 is brought to you by Gifts for Hams. Find their website at www.gifts4hams.com. Get your call sign or club logo engraved on virtually anything you want. Specializing in ham radio related gift ideas, Gifts for Hams is your one-stop shop for lighted call sign displays, coffee mugs, coasters, drinking glasses, smartphone cases, and so much more. Laser engraving and etching to show off your ham radio call sign or club. Shop gifts4hams.com and tell them that Ham Radio 2.0 sent you.
Hola, mi nombre es Noel, KF5SLK, KF5SLK de Watauga, Texas. Estás viendo la serie de podcast de video de Ham Radio 2.0, disponible en livefromthehamshack.tv or YouTube. Hey, my name's Noel, KF5SLK from Watauga, Texas. You're watching the Ham Radio 2.0 video podcast series available on livefromthehamshack.tv or YouTube.
Ham Radio 2.0 episode somewhere in the high 90s. Good evening. My name's Jason, KC5HWB. Recording from the Dayton Hamvention 2017 here in Xenia, Ohio. And this is another forum that I recorded while at the Hamfest this year from the Arden folks. These guys are from Texas, so they're already on my good list. And Randy and the guys are here. They're actually set up. I'm set up at the BridgeCon booth this week, just kind of advertising the video series, and they're set up right across the aisle from me. So I brought my Pico station, which is, of course, easily connected to their setup they have over there. So I've been pretty much on the mesh network since day one out here. And they decided to give a tech talk and forum on the Arden mesh firmware, how it works, how it operates, and do some demonstrations. And it's a little bit different and upgraded from the one I recorded last June of 2016 at the Texas HamCom. So they gave me permission to record their forum here at Dayton, and I'm looking forward to it. So let's take a look at the Arden forum for mesh, Arden Forum for Mesh Networking here at the Dayton 2017 Hamvention at Xenia, Ohio. 73, and thanks for watching.
Today we're pleased to introduce the speaker for our presentation today, which is Andre Hansen, K6AH. He's the project manager for the Arden project, and we'll be talking about mesh networks and emergency communications. We welcome him to the stage at this time. Andre was previously part of the group of Broadband Hamnet, sort of started the mesh movement, and he then spun off with the Arden Group, which he now heads. Andre, your time.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Having been a ham for, since 1969, I have to admit this is my first pilgrimage to Dayton, and I'm enjoying it very much, and I enjoy the venue. I don't come here with the baggage of the historical venue. So anyway, I think I'm very well pleased with the venue, at least from our perspective. So I want to talk today about building a high-speed AUXCOM data network. AUXCOM is the new word for MCOM. I've been told to get used to it. Frankly, it matters very little to me. But before I get started, I want to see a show of hands of how many people have used a high-speed microwave data network before. Okay, well, that was a trick question. I assume most of you have. Yes, this is not your father's ham radio. So the ARRL likes to refer to this technology as high-speed multimedia, and it has a little bit of a history. As Bill suggested, Broadband Hamnet was really the start of this technology. The ARRL had formed a working group to explore the possibility of this type of technology, and then it was the Broadband Hamnet group that finally took the experimentation and the science of it and applied it to make it a technology. And then specifically Broadband Hamnet used shared part 15 space. They shared it with Wi-Fi access nodes. It was a very congested spectrum. And unfortunately, that group is relatively inactive today. They don't really do a lot of software development. And another broadband technology that's in use today is HamWAN. And it uses a traditional point-to-point network. It does require a fair bit of networking skills or network engineering knowledge to operate and to implement. And it also uses shared part 15 spectrum in both the 2 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz bands. Arden, by contrast, uses entirely ham spectrum in the 900 megahertz, 2.4, 3.4, 5.8 gigahertz ham bands. It's a network that can be built on the fly. It doesn't require any knowledge of the network environment that it's being deployed in. It utilizes robust commercial hardware that you can pick up on Amazon or eBay. And it's being actively developed and supported by a team which I'll introduce in a minute. So Arden is a software development project. We're part of the open source community. We put out regular releases with new feature sets. We make our nightly builds available to anyone that wants to have a look at what we're currently working on. Most all of our new features and functionality are driven by requests that come in on our forums, and the people that request it can follow the development of their requested feature functionality on the basis of being able to try out these nightly builds. The developers also are the implementers, and that's kind of a unique situation for the open source community. But we have developers in the San Diego area, Orange County, California, Houston. We have members of our team in New Jersey. All of them are implementing Arden networks in the respective communities. We utilize commercial YSP equipment that we repurpose, where that equipment is generally used in rural America to deliver internet services to the consumer that otherwise doesn't have viable internet access. We strip out, or actually instruct you on how to strip out that firmware and put our own firmware in. These devices are relatively inexpensive. They range from $45 to $89 in most cases. There are some notable exceptions to that. And they're comprised of a Linux computer with an Ethernet interface, a software-defined radio, or SDR, a strip line amplifier, and in most cases, an internal antenna. And you get all of that in a single package for $45 on the low side. This technology will run at up to 144 megabits per second. Now that's faster than my ISP in my home, and likely is yours as well, unless you have fiber optic service in your neighborhood. And all of this can be run using a tech license or better under Part 97. You see the members of our team. Conrad, AG6JEI, is our principal developer and system architect. Joe, Daryl, and Trevor are all developers of one variety or another. Randy, WU2S, is our head marketing guy. He's responsible for the Arden project image and is also our webmaster. And I perform the role of a project manager. Let's talk a little bit about the equipment that's used. It's primarily Ubiquiti equipment. and it's primarily their AirMax line or AirMax M series of products. And that represents a collection of 8 or 10 different models. You will see trade names of theirs, including AirGrid, AirRouter, Bullet, Nano Bridge, Nano Station, Rocket. All of those radios or nodes, as we call them, have their own specific purpose. Some of them are used for long distance links, some of them are used for shorter links, some of them have very narrow beam widths, others have very broad beam widths, and so forth. They have a very robust set of specifications. They have a power output, some as low as 200 milliwatts, some as high as 630 milliwatts. But look at the gain of some of the antennas in these things. A 630 milliwatt radio with a 30 dBi dish, that's 630 watts of EIRP. That's quite a bit of power. And in those higher powered, higher gain configurations, we achieve distances of 50 miles and more in some cases. The temperature specification of these devices is equally impressive, going from minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 176. And we have not heard of one of these devices failing due to temperature, with one exception, and that is a device that comes with a titanium shell, which evidently tends to get real hot inside and does exceed the 176 limit. But those are generally expensive units, and we likely as hams wouldn't be purchasing them anyway. We also have begun to support the TP line of products, specifically the CPE 210 and the CPE 510. They are the 2 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz flavors of those respectively. You will see the team moving into additional products as well. I have to be very careful about what I say because our architect Conrad gets very upset when my lips are just a little too loose. But things like MikroTik, router board, those kinds of devices are likely going to be in the offing as time goes on. So let me describe a little bit about the various node types that we have. We always encourage teams that are trying to implement or have the objective of implementing such a network to use a very structured approach for it. You could buy several hundred of these nodes, scatter them about the neighborhood, and give them to all your friends, and you would form a mesh network. Now that mesh network would likely be pretty reliable because there'll be multiple paths that would be established between these relatively randomly scattered nodes. The problem with that approach, though, is that you don't have control of what the hams with those devices do with them. So it ends up being a relatively risky approach when you try to implement in that fashion for emergency communications or AUXCOM. What we would suggest is that you build a very structured network to begin with, and then over time, as hams add to the mix of these mesh nodes, then it will end up taking on the form of a mesh. But it may not start that way. We like to refer to what I'm going to describe now as the predictable path through the network. Now that's just between now and the time it gets wholesale adopted in the ham community. So what you see illustrated here are fixed backbone nodes. And I'll talk about some of the design considerations and when you would need these. But you can see there are 2 of them here, and there would generally be more than that in a widely served county or community. I'm going to use the Red Cross as an example. The Red Cross is not a sponsor of anything I'm doing. I happen to be part of the Red Cross Disaster Services Communications team in my community, but I'm not trying to suggest anything other than an example of a Red Cross chapter here. And that Red Cross chapter during an emergency would deploy hams to the shelters. Now, how does the shelter connect via this technology to the Red Cross chapter? Well, the Red Cross chapter has a permanent network node on the top of their building connected to the closest backbone node. And that backbone node then has a high-speed, very highly reliable data link to, or I should say across the backbone, to the closest backbone that you would find to the deployed ham at the shelter. Now, the smart ones among you would say, but wait a minute, that I get how the chapter always has a reliable link, but how does the shelter necessarily have a line of sight that it can connect with the closest backbone node? And I would think that's a pretty smart question. And so the way we deal with that is we introduce a third node type, which I'm going to refer to as the relay node. And the relay node is placed strategically at any point where it sees the nearest backbone on the upside and sees the deployed ham at the shelter on the downside. So there's an alternate path then that goes through the relay node in order for that data to connect. Now you'll notice the illustration is showing a new device there at the shelter, and that's the deployed ham pulling out a Wi-Fi access node out of his Shelter Go kit and connecting it to the node that has established its connection to the Arden backbone. That Wi-Fi access point is going to deliver the data services to the incident commander and all the people that need ham communications out of that disaster site. Now, this is my approach to designing the network. It's not the only approach, but my personal preference is to use 3 gigahertz on the backbone. And 3 gigahertz is a really wide band for the hams. And in Southern California anyway, the way the band plan is for this band is there are broadband 20 megahertz wide channels on the very high side and the very low side of the band. So there's a big enough frequency difference between those two segments that I can get away with running 2 3 gigahertz nodes on the same fixed backbone node. So you see over here on the left, I have a 3 gigahertz link from the distant backbone node. And then I'm also rebroadcasting 3 gigahertz down from that same fixed backbone down to the relay node. Again, I can get away with that because I have frequency diversity. They're far enough apart in the spectrum. I always want to have 2 gigahertz down to the deployed ham because that way he or she can make a dynamic decision based on where they're deployed to, whether to go direct to the backbone or to the relay node. So what are some design considerations for these 3 node types? The backbone really requires elevation. It has to be the layer of the network that gets you from one extreme in the county to the other extreme. Another attribute of a backbone node is a high gain antenna and high power. So you would choose the higher powered radios, you would choose the higher gain beams and which have the narrower bandwidth. You would also choose a radio that uses what I refer to as MIMO, multi-in, multi-out. And I'm just going to spend a minute kind of getting into the technical weeds here. I wouldn't do this if I didn't feel so strongly about MIMO. MIMO says or takes advantage of the fact that there's about a 30 dB null between a vertically polarized antenna and a horizontally polarized antenna. Oftentimes it's even more than 30 dB. So what MIMO does is it takes advantage of that and establishes, in fact it's actually two radios. It establishes one data path in the vertical domain and the other one in the horizontal domain. So you can double the data throughput as a result. If doubling the data throughput ends up not being possible for the node, then the node uses the vertical and horizontal domains as a signal diversity, so that if it doesn't hear well in one domain, it picks it up on the other domain. This, back before we moved these things into the ham band, we used the broadband hamnet approach, which was the shared part 15 spectrum. Now this goes back a couple of years, but in the 2 gigahertz band, we know that Wi-Fi clobbers just about everything we try to put up. Well, guess what? Most all of the Wi-Fi access node antennas and the laptops that were trying to connect via Wi-Fi, the antennas were pointed upward. There was very little activity in the horizontal domain. So you could actually get away with nulling out a lot of that activity simply by turning these devices on their side or using MIMO as a result. That particular issue is no longer there because we, of course, don't have that sort of interference to deal with anymore. I also personally would, if 3 gigahertz ends up for whatever reason not being your choice, I think the only other choice for backbone nodes would be at 5 gigahertz. There's a fair bit of ham-only spectrum available there as well. Relay nodes, some attributes of quality relay nodes are going to be antennas that have high gain or narrow beam width antennas pointing upward to the backbone, and have a very broad coverage antenna looking downward to the deployed nodes. Ubiquity makes what are called sector antennas. You've seen a lot of this technology on cell sites. They're long vertical columns that are oftentimes placed 45 or 120 degrees apart. And these antennas that Ubiquity uses or manufactures are 120 degrees wide. They're 9 degrees tall in terms of their radiation pattern, and they have an electrical down tilt of about 3 or 4 degrees. So they're ideally suited for delivering these data services downward to relay sites or deployed sites. Relay nodes are also cross-band. In other words, they've got 3 or 5 gigahertz looking upward and 2 gigahertz looking downward. The way we accommodate that cross-banding is we allow you to connect the nodes together via an Ethernet cable so that the data between them doesn't use up any RF space, it simply uses the cable itself. The trickiest part about relay nodes is finding where the best place is for them. It's not easy to imagine places where you have line of sight to the backbone and line of sight to the shelter, the deployed node. So we recommend using path prediction software. There are several of them out there. My personal preference is Radio Mobile. And I don't get into that in this presentation, but if you come and visit our booth 1001, I think tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. is my next presentation on how to locate relay nodes using Radio Mobile. I encourage you to visit that, our booth for that. And lastly, deployed nodes oftentimes are ham-owned in real organized groups. They would be part of a deployment Go kit, as of course would be the Wi-Fi access point that actually connects the user services. These nodes run on anything from 10.8 to 24 volts. So they're on a deep cycle RV or marine battery. You would get several days use of them. Many implementations specify solar powered for this, and that's well suited. So how do I actually build it? You find mountains where you can. You find water towers where you don't have mountains. You find skyscrapers or tall corporate buildings, or you find commercial or ham towers to put the backbone nodes on. Already talked about the dish. The rocket is the device of choice for that. It's a MIMO device. It's the highest, one of the highest powered devices that Ubiquiti makes. Relay nodes are typically on buildings or tall masts. They're oftentimes deployed specific to a disaster, the nature of and where the disaster is. Many times when you have a group that has some funding, they plan in advance where these relay sites would be. They understand where the network distribution is and where it isn't, and as a result will fill in those empty areas with these relay nodes. Nano beams or power beams are devices that are suitable for upstream. Nano stations are suitable for downstream. And as far as the deployed nodes are concerned, they're typically deployed on top of 10 or 20 foot masts that come out of the Go kit, and they are simple and inexpensive. So of all the things that I've described here, the cheapest nodes are the ones that are deployed by the hams. That also means, that suggests that the backbone is probably the most expensive, and it is. The 3 gigahertz nodes are 2-3 times the price, just simply because they don't manufacture nearly as many of them. Okay, let's have a look at some of these backbone sites. Now, I know you guys are going to be envious. You flatlanders out there are going to say, wait a minute, this isn't very practical. I've actually put this up here for a couple of reasons. Having grown up in Southern California, I can remember being surprised the first time I saw a photo like this, because when I was growing up, there was so much smog in the air. We had no idea we had a mountain range just behind us. But now it's well leveraged. These things are between 5,000 and 9,000 feet in a couple of instances. But we definitely take care, or we take advantage of that vertical dimension. This is an example of a node, in fact it's mine, on Mount Palomar on the north end of San Diego County. It's looking across the county from north to south, and it's connected to a similar node, which you'll see in just a minute, on Mount Otay, just north of the Mexican border. And that's a span of 48.8 miles. So this is testimony that it actually works. At that same site on Mount Palomar, here's a couple of examples of the downstream sector antennas. I'm going to guess the one on the left is the 3 gigahertz node and the one on the right is 2 gigahertz. You see the rocket radios that are mounted. Actually, they clip on to the back of those antennas. And in this case, it's a friend of mine who owns a ham cabin, a vacation cabin. I think his wife would object to the term, but anyway, I'm really fortunate to have him willing to let me put these 3 nodes on his property, and of course it's a beautiful area up there. Now this is the other end of the link. This is the San Diego Repeater Association on Mount Otay. And they actually have 2 towers up there. You can kind of make them out This is the north tower, and you can see the dish antenna, which is the point-to-point backbone link, and then the sector antenna is mounted just above it. That's the 2 gigahertz sector. The 3 gigahertz sector is actually on the south tower, and it's very difficult to see in this photo. But the benefits of using a club repeater site is that they're often free, and if not free, cheap. In this instance, I pay an annual fee for power. These things run, 300 milliamps, whatever. And I also pay a shrubbery maintenance fee. The property is on BLM land, and anyway, it's inconsequential. I'm happy to pay it. It's virtually free. And you're not going to have QRM from the wireless internet service providers. So they're generally very, very good sites. And it tends to kind of get the club involved. Sometimes it's difficult to get clubs to sort of sponsor and promote this technology to their members. But when you're on their tower, they tend to do that. I'm also on some commercial towers, so I can tell you that they are generally well placed in the community. They're often much taller. This is 120 foot, they're both 120 foot towers. There are actually 2 of them on the site. I have 3 nodes on each of them. I have a backbone link going south on the one on the left with a 3 gigahertz and 2 gigahertz sector antenna delivering the data to, in this case, southern Riverside County. And then the one on the right, similarly a backbone link that goes off to San Bernardino County with sector antennas again on 2 gigahertz and 3 gigahertz. And in this case, I have to buy the owner lunch every year. He owns this facility, he's a ham, he gets what we're doing, okay? And he wants to see us succeed, and he's willing to provide some space for us in exchange for that, to ensure that it's success. And he charges me $1 a month, which normally equates to 1 lunch a year, which isn't so bad. You're not always going to stumble into these kinds of things, but they need to be explored. If you don't ask the question, you never find out whether these are opportunities that are open or not. Here's a clever small footprint with a large coverage area. This is in Camarillo Hills, Ventura County. They've gone to Home Depot and bought a tough shed, and I think they maybe paid $600 for it. They put a solar panel on the top. I'm sure there are batteries in the shed. The shed is much bigger than it needs to be because all of the Arden equipment is actually contained within the nodes you see there. You see on the left, you see a sector antenna, and you see the higher gain antenna links in and out for the backbone. All right, let's look at some relay sites. This is a very attractive one. It's out in the wild. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should find somebody's private property and throw some equipment on, although it has been done. But it doesn't take a lot. You can see that maybe there's a concrete footing on the mast, and they've thrown a high gain dish for the backbone, and they have what appears to be a nano station up above it for delivering data services downstream. Another example of a small footprint and a large coverage area. Both of these photos are of the same node or node cluster, and I believe this one's also solar powered. But not a lot of presence. It doesn't require a huge footprint. This one's in Ventura County. This is one of my favorite sites. It's actually part of the OC mesh, or the Orange County mesh, and it's an atypical mid-mile or relay node because it picks up the backbone from or using sector antennas. So it's built a little differently than I would normally prescribe, but it has a has a surveillance camera mounted upside down under a Marie Callender pie tin. And it's 3 sectors, one for 2 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 3 gigahertz. And it has a unique environmental monitoring system. You can see the dial thermometer down there in the lower right-hand corner. And he just simply spins the camera around and looks at the thermometer to find out what the ambient temperature is in the area. And sometimes the solar array is used as shade for the local wildlife. Here's a California gray fox that's curious about what's going on. And in San Bernardino County, we have nodes on top of their city water supply on a water tank. And you can see it there. It's well constructed. It's also hosting a VHF repeater site. Again, high gain antenna to the backbone, and nanostation for delivering those data services downward. As I had mentioned earlier, the relay node is often temporarily deployed based on the demand of the disaster that's being supported. And the 2 pictures on the left, the far left one illustrates or is from the angle of the high gain dish that's on top, connecting to the Palomar node, which you actually can't see. It's kind of off in the haze in the background. But then the center picture shows where the downward pointing, from a topology perspective, the downward pointing antenna is, and it's pointing over at a shelter away on the other side of the field. Now the antenna on the right is also a relay node, and that one was put up on the fly. They needed data services in an area that was buried in city buildings and downtown. And so Ham, who's also a business executive, simply put up a node and suction cupped it to the inside of the window of his office, and worked effectively. So you can get clever like this based on the specific needs of a given disaster. I get a kick out of this. I don't know if you can make it out, but you know, you can see that the window is fogged a little bit, with the exception of the area right in front of the antenna. So the microwave energy from the node is actually acting as a bit of a defroster for them. Probably also consuming some energy along the way. And I mentioned using radio mobile to find common ground. This is an example of one analysis. This happens to be a coverage analysis that you can run on radio mobile. These are 3 nodes in San Diego County. Palomar to the north, Otay to the south, and then over on the east is Mount Laguna. And you can see those 3 nodes by themselves cover a fair bit of the county. And those areas that are not green would be those areas where you would likely need a relay node to gain coverage into. So you can do this sort of analysis and really understand the service area and where you're going to have problems and where you're not. So now you've built this network, and what do you have? All you have is a network. You can't do much with the network. Some of you are probably frustrated, maybe in having experimented with mesh networking, and you build it and you think, oh gee, we've built it, we've accomplished what we set out to do, but it isn't much of anything until you have some services and customers that are using it. So I'm going to describe to you some killer applications for this technology. And the primary driver of these killer applications is connecting the disaster area. That would be the incident commander, the guys that are trying to coordinate activities, connecting them with the outside world. And by that I mean connecting them outside of the disaster zone, connecting them back to the local chapter, and beyond. And there are many ways you can do that. You can do it with email. WinLink is a terrific example of that. I think of all the tools I would want with me at a deployed site, I think WinLink is right at the top. Next one down I'm illustrating is Mesh Chat, which is a keyboarding app that allows you to chat with other hams on the network, or users in general on the network, not just hams. Mesh Chat also acts as a file repository. You can upload files that could be shared, in other words, downloaded by other users on the network and so forth. The third example here is WebEOC. Most disaster agencies are using WebEOC. Not going to get into the specifics of how they do that, but generally it means connecting the disaster site with an internet-based site, a cloud-based site beyond the mesh itself, completely possible within the Arden technology. In the next frame over, I describe or I illustrate some technologies for voice over IP telephony. Now this one's interesting because you can actually provide a telephone handset for anyone at the disaster site to pick up. You show them a dial plan of how you connect, and they dial a 4-digit number or more or less, and they connect to that individual via a voice over IP connection across the network. You can also provide them at the far end a public switched telephone network gateway, so that you could have them dial 9 first, and that connects them to a physical phone circuit, and they get dial tone from the local phone provider at the far end. In other words, at an area that is not impacted by the disaster. You can also provide them Wi-Fi connectivity from their cell phone, so that you can dial from your cell phone using a voice over IP application to other users within the disaster area, to users outside the disaster area, and when coupled with that public switched telephone network gateway, anyone else in the world. And lastly, you can take a Samsung device, which is marketed by Verizon. They call it the Verizon Extender. And by plugging the extender into the Arden network at the disaster site, you actually reestablish cell service. That's a mini cell site that will support up to 7 concurrent cell connections. So that's a telephone that is completely unmodified, being used by an individual that is used to using the phone for both voice and data communications, and the service is completely transparent to the user. You see some names in that technology space. The app I use on my phone is CSIP Simple. There are PBXs like Asterisk, Free PBX, and 3CX that are all viable solutions. These things can run on a PC, they can run on a Raspberry Pi on the network. So they're not difficult to put together. We are offering the little mini classes, the tutorials in our booth on how to actually implement voice over IP, PBXs, and so forth. Encourage you to stop by our booth and check out the schedule on when the next one is. In the next frame over, I talk about, I've illustrated the types of video you can be passing over the net. It can be surveillance video, it can be video conferencing services, it can be for example, a Grandstream Android video phone. where you can make video calls. All of that might be very valuable, perhaps less valuable than some of the basic services I've just described earlier. And then in the last frame, there are agency-specific services that can be run on the network. Another Red Cross example would be their Safe and Well service. You can put out laptops for the general population that's impacted by the disaster to connect to the Red Cross website on the internet and let everybody know, their friends and family know, that they are safe and well. And lastly, the CERT organization has a very specific set of specific mission to go out and do damage assessments, and they have a form that they typically use to identify how many are injured, how many have died, whether there's a fire, a gas leak, and so forth in the community. And there are applications that are being developed specifically for collecting that data as they walk around the community, and that are being integrated directly with the Arden technology. And then once you have some of these services running, it's crucial that you exercise your skills. This gentleman is Don Hill. Wave Don. He's KE6BXT, and he's part of the RACES group and also the chief implementer in Orange County, California. He is seen here managing a series of cameras that were deployed across an Arden network to support a big parade in San Juan Capistrano. And the network was deployed mostly on the back of member pickup trucks with relatively short masts. And you can see the nodes at the very top of those masts and the cameras just below them. So that's critical. Now, at Hamvention, Arden has a presence in booth, as I mentioned, 1001. We are grateful that we've been sponsored by the Miami Valley Mesh Alliance. They've graciously given us time here in this forum, and they've given us space in the booth. I encourage you to stop by. We have 15-minute tutorials on the hour and on the half hour. And on the half hour, we have one-on-one Q&A. So if you have a specific question about implementing mesh, or even if you have a node that's been bricked and you're having a tough time with it, we would be delighted to help you through that. Both Randy and I, W2S and I, are there manning the booth, as are the Miami Valley Mesh Alliance folks. There is a mesh network running here at Hamvention. It's on 2.4 gigahertz, specifically channel -2. It's 10 megahertz bandwidth, and it's running Arden-V3-10 as the SSID. The MVMA has quite a presence here. If you're a local ham, it's not difficult to get involved with this technology. The MVMA has done most of the heavy lifting already, and you should be able to connect in most instances without a lot of grief. And for more information, I encourage you to, one, go to the Arden website. It's www.arden.org. When you get home in your mailbox, you'll see the June issue of QST. And I've written an article that covers what I've covered here this afternoon in a little bit more detail. I also have written or I have presentations that I've performed and papers I've written for the ARRL Tapper Digital Communications Conference. Proceedings from 2016 and 2015 will give you a lot of information about what goes on down from a technical perspective, if you're interested in that. I also have a YouTube video I've produced that's particularly effective if you want to deliver this technology, say to your club. It runs 45 minutes. It's timed so that you can use that as your presentation for one of your club meetings. You're welcome to do that. And of course, Ham Radio Now, Ham Radio 360, and those kinds of news media groups have all done one form of interview with the Arden team as well. So I encourage you to look those up. And of course, you can always get a hold of me on the Arden website. I several times a day am reading postings on the forum and responding to questions and issues that come up. So if as time permits, I'll take questions. Yes, sir. Green. Canopy hardware? I'm not aware. I don't believe that's on the list. But if you want it, if it is a Linux-based, he's asking if we support Canopy hardware, which is another manufacturer. If it's a Linux-based system, there is a chance we would, we could, and I encourage you to post it to the forum or send me an email, and I'd be happy to have a look at it. I'll take the question in the back row. Yep, that's you.
Can you give me a general idea of budgeting for the backbone this year?
So, yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, how expensive are the backbone nodes and the relay nodes? You know what? A lot of it depends on what kind of tower you go on. I have paid over $1,000 to put nodes up on a commercial tower.
Ignore the, I'm talking
The equipment?
location is always very
Yeah. So backbone nodes are in the couple of $1,000 range. And that's because I have a managed switch inside. I have, battery backup. I may have solar. Yeah, a couple of $1,000. I think you could probably do it less if you were, if you didn't have high reliability as a requirement and so forth. If not, you could probably get by under $1,000. And the green shirt here?
Have you ever gotten a significant interference on the backbone or on the downlink?
Have I ever gotten significant interference? Interference comes from a lot of places. I had a ham email me saying, I'm a EME moon bounce contester and I've got a level of noise I'm not used to. He and I now have an agreement. During the EME contest, I shut my backbone down. That sort of thing, and coordinating with other entities. I'm on a commercial tower in Riverside. I showed you a couple of those photos. I am convinced that there's a wireless ISP that is broader than he's legally allowed to be, so I have that interference to deal with. But presumably I'll get beyond that because of we are operating under different rule set. He can't be in my spectrum. So I would say not since we were in Part 15 have we had those kinds of issues. Yeah. Blue jacket. Okay, the encryption question. Yeah, so this is a tough thing to even talk about because everybody has opinions and a lot of hams have passionate opinions about it. So I'm gonna do my best. I'm not an attorney. I do have a personal policy that I implement within the San Diego County. The FCC has been intentionally ambiguous about this sort of thing. One interpretation of it is you can't pass any encrypted traffic on the network. Another interpretation is I'm not encrypting anything. I'm taking a client's packets and I'm moving them through the network and delivering them where the client wants them to be delivered. And I look at that and I use this analog. I say, what's happening today over voice UHF and VHF? You know, hams are writing down IC213 messages, or the source of the message writes it down on a 213 form and hands it to the ham. And the ham looks at it and sees a bunch of letters and numbers and doesn't really know what it means. Doesn't care. He picks up the microphone and he says, the following message needs to be delivered to so-and-so, and it reads as follows. You know, F7, 9, J. How is that really any different than passing an encrypted packet from a sender to a receiver? I don't know. I don't know how it's any different. But where 2 years ago the debate was all about HIPAA, you know, and the personal information, it's no longer about HIPAA. You know what? That argument is completely irrelevant today, because Edward Snowden suddenly turns data privacy and hacking, takes the whole internet and turns it on its ear. And since then, everybody on the internet is encrypting everything on the internet. I can't deliver a web EOC to my customer anymore because it's encrypted. Well, so what is that interpretation? I can tell you, in San Diego County, my interpretation is, if a customer sends me a packet and I don't obscure the intent of that packet, I'm not breaking that law, or I am using that, call it liberal interpretation of the law. Now the FCC, I completely get. I understand why they're nebulous. They don't want ham spectrum to be used for commercial purposes. And if all of the data is encrypted, how would you know if the data is for commercial purposes or not? And I don't know how to get around that. And I value the ham spectrum. So I want some sort of ability to police the use of that cherished, valuable spectrum. But at the same time, I know that if we're listening to our customers, and if you know, Tom Gallagher writes in May's QST, we need to be listening to our customers' needs, or else we're going to become irrelevant. Well, our customer needs are, you know, connect me to my cloud service because I need it. It's crucial to my support of the disaster. So, yes, sir, Mike. 900 megahertz gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of going through some vegetation, and some of these microwaves can be, you know, reflected off of passive repeaters and that sort of thing. I have not done so reliably ever. The other thing that occurs, and this is not a question that's come up, but it occurs to me that thermal inclines, you know, or inversion layers in the atmosphere tend to bend microwave signals. And so one of the tools that we offer, one of the pages for the Arden administrative interface, is an archive of 24 hours of signal to noise ratio. And you can see, you know, when the sun goes up and the sun goes down, there's a dip in the signal to noise ratio. And of course, if you're clever enough, you can raise the upward pointing high gain antenna a little bit so that half the day you're on the upper side of the lobe, and the other half of the day you're on the lower side of the lobe as that diffraction occurs, to try to level that out. Yeah, way in the back against the wall. How does Arden work with the WinLink packet? I'm not that expert, but basically Arden is an IP network, so you would treat Arden as if you were telnetting across the internet to a WinLink, help me here, post office? I don't know. Yeah? Okay. Okay, well, one more question in the blue, yeah. Can you stand up and try it again, QRO?
What's the opinion on using point-to-point technology for remote access?
Oh, what's the advantage of using Arden as opposed to point-to-point? Oh, well, it works just fine that way. So the big difference, or the big advantage that Arden has is the automated configurability. In other words, you don't have to know anything. You load these things, you turn them on, and presto, within seconds, they recognize each other, they've figured out all the network stuff, and they've set all those values, and away you go. Traditional, like if you were to buy a Ubiquity device off the shelf, you would have to configure it either as an access point or a station, and two access points can't talk to each other. So I mean, and then you would have to determine what their IP addresses ought to be, what their routing tables, and what kind of devices and networks you're going to have on each end, and I mean, it's a lot of work. Okay, thanks very much for coming this afternoon. I'm grateful to see the big turnout.